we can now do stuff around aging because we're getting older, and it's real. And no, we're not going to disappear. I am an out and proud Black lesbian. I have contributed to the culture of Black lesbians. I have contributed to the culture of radical lesbian feminism, of womanist culture. I'm not going to be erased because you might be a little pissed off right now. No, that's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen.
Welcome to the Zami Nobla National Organization of Black Lesbians on Aging podcast. We are your sound source for Black lesbian herstory. I'm your host, Angela Denise Davis. Karen Williams is the nation's first Black out lesbian comic doing comedy with lesbian content. She was gracious enough to have a conversation with us when she was in town for our Women Sweet on Women 2019 event held over the Audre Lorde Scholarship Weekend in February. I know you'll enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed interviewing her. So let's get on with the serious business about being funny.
Hi, my name is Karen Williams, and I am 102 years old, although I present as 66.
And how do you show up in the world, Karen?
Well, I show up in the world as a human being, although I do a lot. So I could be called a human doing, that's for sure. I really aim for true authenticity in my life. Authenticity is very important to me, living that authentic life. I made the decision early on that once I, quote unquote, came out as a lesbian, that I am going to be as authentic a human being as I can be. I was very afraid of having to live two different lives and trying to remember who I told what, when I told them. And since I know that the only constant in life is change, that I would be changing as time went by. And how would I be able to grow into some of the stories and lies that I was telling myself. So I decided I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to create a separate persona for me that was happy in the clubs and unhappy other places. I was just going to be myself.
How did you come to know you were a lesbian?
Well, the word is daunting because I wasn't really aware of the word lesbian per se as much of the fact that I liked girls. So as I shared from the stage, my parents had separated. My father was living down in Greenwich Village. We, the children, and my mother was still up in Soundview in the Bronx. And she calls my father and says, "I think Karen likes girls." And he said, "Okay." And that was it. And so my segue into really liking girls didn't meet with much opposition. So I've never had to bear the weight of shame around loving someone of my own sex. Yeah.
So when did you first understand that comedy was something that was essential to your being?
Well, I have the vocation of being a comic. And at the same time, I can say that laughter and humor was always part of my life. It was always in my home. My dad loved comedy, and so as he did jazz. So I think that those two things for me, probably the jazz first. And I think that being introduced to jazz at a very young age, he knew a lot of jazz musicians. Thelonious Monk, I remember going with my dad to his home when we were young, and he knew lots and lots of jazz people, was pretty immersed in that world as an aficionado, and I'm sure later on took up the trumpet himself, much later on. That exposure probably led me to feel almost as though improvisation is in my blood, because as I grew into the comedy later on, I've opened for many jazz people. The jazz concerts, or there was always kind of that love relationship between comedy and jazz. And so I could understand that, and especially the improvisational piece of doing stand-up comedy. So my son is a sketch comic and an actor and now a director at Second City, Chicago. He's been with them 17 years, and certainly being exposed to the improvisational, again, aspect of comedy and then music. He's a rapper, so it all, the times have been exciting in terms of being able to, again, embrace that improvisational aspect and then fuse it with your own desire to be authentic. And it leads to really a pretty rich and fulfilling life. My girlfriend now says to me all the time, "You're so wealthy, you're so rich." And I cherish that observation, because in this capitalistic, I went off last night, the patriarchal, sexist, capitalistic society, with all the heteronormative pressures that we're supposed to concede to, certainly issues of wealth and money manifestation are huge for all of us. And there can be so much shame around that, not measuring up to all of the very idealistic models that we see out there. We're looking at People magazine, and we don't realize sometimes we're looking at the same 50 people, like, all the time.
Right.
Like, I know more about George Clooney and his wife and their twin babies than I really should be concerned about.
Right.
I mean, I go out of town and I come back and I say to people, "What has Angelina been doing while I was on tour?" Like, how is she and Brad and the kids? It's like, what are those Jenners up to? The Kardashians. It's like, really, people? Right. Is that the quality of my life? And then I'll turn on something, I'll channel surf and I'll put on Keeping Up with the Kardashians, and I can barely stand their voices for more than 5 minutes and the inane things that they're discussing. It's like, really? Wow. What's that like? I don't have any interest. We as Black lesbians, we are breathing rarefied air, and unfortunately we don't know it. Black women, period, in America. I've traveled. We are exceptional women, and yet we don't know it. Our powers of stamina and perseverance and fortitude and love, that deep, unabiding, ruthless love of our children and our families that just sustains us through horrific stuff.
Yes.
Horrific.
And that is one reason why I'm so passionate about the work I do with the podcast, because I think it gives us an opportunity to share those stories.
Yes.
And give people a chance to see the lives of Black lesbians that they don't really always perceive.
They don't understand it. I had my 65th birthday party at my home last year, and my friends came from all over the United States to come celebrate with me. And one of my dear friends, who I just saw this trip, is a woman of Italian descent. Her family owned, restaurants, and she's a lovely, gracious, beautiful woman. And she was with several of us Black lesbian moms in the kitchen talking about what happens with our children when on a Friday or Saturday night my son decides to go out and have fun just like anybody else's kid. And the only thing, he's with white kids, in the next town over from where I live. And they get stopped, and he's the only one ever hauled into jail, hauled into the police station, always having to take the breathalyzer, always spending the night in the jail while they're let go at their own recognizance. And you mention this stuff. And one of my friends that was there was from the Houston Police Department, retired. And another one had worked in corrections. She was there. And my white friend, however well-meaning, says, "You should report this stuff. This should be reported," And all of a sudden it got like deathly quiet in there as, the ex-police officer and the ex-correctional officer are looking at each other, looking at me, and my friend just started crying. Because she was smacked in the face with the injustice when her son goes out on the weekend. Other than he's got a key. She's not even sitting up waiting for him to come in.
Right.
I don't sleep until my son comes in. We have all kinds of deals we have to make about texting and calling and, dial this number in case this happens. And it gets encoded into our cultural experience. And these other people have no idea this stuff is going on. Okay, if I'm not here, then you call so-and-so. And if they're not there, then you do this or that. And you don't have to answer all the questions. And I don't know that white women are home grilling their teenage and 20-year-old and 30-year-old sons on the fifth, what is it that you don't have to answer
plead the fifth.
to plead the fifth. Right. I don't know that you have to school them on that, but we better know.
Right. These are the heavy things that make life difficult and challenging for who we are in this particular instance.
Yeah.
Are there ways in which comedy can relieve some of that pressure, that tension, in particular that we face as, we can be as particular as talking about Black lesbians, older lesbians, or we can even be general just talking about Black people, period. How can comedy, or how do you use comedy as a way of helping people move in the world with a release of some of this pressure and with an opportunity to find places of thriving?
Oh, that's a very complex and deep question, and right off the top, I can say I would not have been able to survive if I had not cultivated a sense of humor. In my workshops, I'm the founder and CEO of the International Institute of Humor and Healing Arts, known as HaHa Institute. And in my work, I feel as though I'm a prophet of spreading the word around the healing power of humor. I have to say the healing power of appropriate humor, because not all humor is healing. We have a culture in this country of put-down humor. So to be able to transform the culture itself around the use of humor is the work that I undertake. And I don't do it alone. I've studied humor. I wrote my bachelor's degree when I went back to school in my 40s. I wrote my bachelor's degree in humor and healing. There was a special personally designed major at First College at Cleveland State University, and I undertook those studies in order to be able to articulate what actually happens when you approach life from the vantage point of that healing power of humor. Black people, in particular African American people in this country, have a very strong relationship with humor. And there's one gentleman, Izzy Gazelle, who refers to humor as the language of the oppressed, because Jewish American people have it. Anybody that's really strong in their culture has used humor in order to overcome the oppression that they've had to deal with. And considering that almost every cultural group in America has gone through the rites of oppression here, rights, R-I-T-E-S, it's why the comics have virtually taken over. The media, for sure. All your late night hosts are comics. Ellen's, your daytime host, is a comic. They're stand-ups. Your political commentators are comics. I just got my newest product is my girlfriend made up for me and surprised me. It's a picture of me on the front of the T-shirt, and it says, "If you want to know the truth, ask a comic." I didn't make that up. It was on the cover of an Utne Reader couple of decades ago. And it's because comics are viewed as people who are uncompromising in terms of telling the truth.
Right.
Everybody else has to compromise. If you have a job, you have to compromise because you don't want to get fired. Or, you can't fire me. I don't have a job. You know, I'm contracted by people. So it's a different mindset. I couldn't face life without embracing the humor that's there. Now, and as I explained to people, laughter is an expression of spontaneous joy. So children laugh, right? Some 200 times a day, something like that. Adults laugh less because humor involves the intellect. And once you involve the intellect, then here comes those prejudices, those biases, the things that inhibit us from feeling joy. That's what people don't understand. We are here to enjoy life. Our philosophies teach us that we're supposed to be suffering, but that's not the truth. The truth is we are here to enjoy life. Now, how do we get there? And that's the struggle. And so, no, every situation is not laughable. Every situation is not humorous. And yet, when you find the humor in a situation, then you can liberate yourself. And that's why I love comedy. Comedy helped me free myself. It helped me free myself from the external world trying to define for me who I am. When you laugh, you are in the present moment. You can't think about the past, and you're not thinking about the future. And for most of us, you know, they say that depression is the disease of looking in the past, and anxiety is the disease of looking into the future. And I'm not talking about normal days of just feeling sad. I'm talking about that deep depression where you can't get out of the bed, or that anxiety that now turns into a disorder. When we learn how to live in just this present moment, like right now I'm here, I'm on this podcast, I'm looking at you, we're sitting across from each other, I'm not thinking about what's going to happen later on, I'm not reflecting on what happened before we met. I'm right here in this moment with you. Well, when we laugh in that moment and have that shared connection together, that's all that exists. And there's a freedom in that. And in that free space, I don't care if you're a man or a woman. I don't care if you're trans or bi. I don't care if you're a child or an adult. I don't care if you're a teacher or a student. In that rare moment that we get to share that laugh together, we are spiritual entities sharing a connection. It's very profound, really. And what I love the most is how Black people laugh. Like we call on Jesus. We just, we curse. We slap things. We fall over. We cry. We laugh till the tears come down. And I recall some of those laughs. Like I was in San Francisco in the beginning of the AIDS pandemic. And so I remember being in the kitchen of a friend of mine as he was telling me that he'd been diagnosed with AIDS. And we looked at each other in the eyes and we wept. I mean, we wept. And the weeping turned to tears. And before we knew it, we were rolling around on the floor on top of each other and laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing. Like to this day, I remember that. And I can't tell you why that happened. I just really firmly believe that there's grief and there's sorrow in realization. And then it's almost like the body says, I can't take any more of that. You know, like I just can't take any more of that. And it spills over. And I think that's why people have the urge to laugh at funerals. You know, I mean, all this stuff is crazy stuff that I study, but.
Well, you know, it's interesting because going back just a bit, it was fascinating hearing you talk about laughter and being in the moment. Because there's something very spiritual about that.
Yes.
And I know that you've been a Buddhist for like over 40 years or so.
Yes.
Has any of your spirituality or the way you move in the world spiritually influenced your understanding of how laughter and comedy is a healing art?
Oh, definitely. I would say definitely. Those two things I credit with really healing myself. Finding Buddhism when I was about 19, beginning to practice Nichiren Buddhism, and then I started working professionally as a comic at about 31, something like that. So I credit the Buddhism with really healing me on just so many levels in terms of restoring my hope, my faith in people, and my learning to love myself. And then the comedy just healing me from all those fears. I had so many fears, and it's so sweet because my girlfriend and I were just with my dad, and he's the one who introduced me to Buddhism, and she looked at him and she just said, she's just so fearless, you know? And I take that as like a high compliment, you know? Maybe for some people it's, oh, they're so rich, you know? Maybe that makes people feel good, but I know what I came from, where I was just so afraid of everything, and I had these two children, and what was to become of us, and how was I going to make it, and just, my son was 12, the other one was a year old, and I knew the 12-year-old was going to want to go to college, and I knew I couldn't send him to college on $9 an hour as a secretary. And a friend just walked through, we were hanging out at the Oakland Hyatt or something in Oakland, California, and a friend walked through, and he wasn't a friend of mine, he was an associate, and said to all of us, about 6 or 8 of us, he was going to be performing comedy somewhere and at the Hegenberger Inn out by the Oakland airport, and I sprouted out of my mouth, I do comedy too. And he was grandstanding, and he said, well, would you like 5 minutes in my act? And I said, sure. And he walked away, and my friends were like, what did you just say? What do you mean you do comedy? What happened, you know? And I mean, it was a mystical, spiritual moment. Wow. Because I knew how to write comedy. I had, back in the day when I lived in Los Angeles, Columbia Pictures used to hire ghost writers, you know, and it was more or less like an internship kind of thing. And I worked with a couple of people and worked on a couple of films that were never made or anything like that. It's pretty common. But I learned how to structure comedy.
Was this when you were in your 20s?
In my 20s.
Okay. And then this mystical experience happened, and this was your first time?
I went home and I wrote, my first routine was about riding the 57M in Oakland. And it was at the time when everybody was smoking weed, so they'd get on the back of the bus and smoke, and I would talk about missing my stop or, suddenly needing a snack or something, And that was one of my first routines, and he gave me the 5 minutes, and I arrived at the club about 8. My girlfriend, my best friend, who I just saw last week, Carmen, drove me to the club, and I was like, oh, Carmen, I feel so sick. I don't know if I could do it, and all of that, and I didn't go up till almost midnight. There were like 5 drunks and 8 chairs, and it was just... And I went up there in this Senegalese dance outfit, and my friend who braided Stevie Wonder's hair had braided my hair in this gold and purple threads and all this stuff. I looked so regal out at this really crappy bar out by the Oakland airport, the type that had the red heart-shaped beds with the mirrors on the ceiling, terrible place. And I did 5 minutes and then went into doing an extra minute, and he was over there giving me the timeout sign. It got good to me. And then he started taking me around, this guy.
Wow.
Dap started taking me around to different clubs around Oakland. I didn't get paid. We would send a glass around, and the first time I got paid, we got $30 stuffed into a liquor glass. I got $15. I had to pay the babysitter $12, and I had $3 left, and I bought a Vogue magazine.
Wow.
And I sat there and I paged through that Vogue magazine like it was gold. That was my first earnings. So, I smile at the at the people who, want stardom in 2 years, because I did that for 2 years and I just made enough to pay the babysitter.
Wow.
And I don't know what happened to DAP, but I went on to compete in the Bay Area Black Comedy competitions. And then my dear friend Marga Gomez said, "Oh, we're doing a San Francisco Pride, and would you like to be on the stage?" And I said, "Sure." And she said, "Well, you're going to be in all the newspapers." I was like, "Sure." She was letting me know this was going to out me as a lesbian. I said, "Sure." And I was working at a real estate appraisal office in Berkeley at the time, and my boss put the newspaper advertisement on the community board at work, and I kept taking it down, and he kept putting it up. It was so funny because he was so proud of me, but he didn't know anything about me being a lesbian or anything, or that it was gay pride. He probably thought it was just a happy gathering, gay pride. So, my beginnings were just really kind of like that, very sweet, and coming out in that San Francisco Bay Area, Oakland, Berkeley, San Francisco community was just a dream come true, especially for a lesbian comedian. We didn't know what we were doing. I feel very proud to be with the likes of Leah DeLaria and Kate Clinton and Linda Mokes and people that were just so courageous in the beginning to just define themselves as lesbian comics. And so people were freaked out when I would just say, "I'm a lesbian comic," and "Why do you have to say lesbian?" And it was like, years later when I was in New York City, Jackie Mason was doing his Broadway show. And I was there writing, and I saw he was doing his Broadway show. I went to the theater and bought a last-minute ticket, and I was in the third row. And I think there were only 2 black people in the audience. This is New York City, but it's Jackie Mason, a Jewish comic doing Jewish comedy for Jewish people. And I thought, why can't I be a lesbian comic doing lesbian comedy for lesbian people? What's the big deal? And that's what I maintained. So I taught a senior seminar in stand-up comedy, 4-credit course at Cleveland State University. And I opened up my semester with Jackie Mason's Broadway show to let people know that this is the power of comedy, that this can be a voice for however you identify, whoever you are. You can use your voice to express the reality of yourself, your culture, and your commitments to your culture. He had no problem standing up there. "Oh, have you ever heard of a Jewish clinic?" I'm dying laughing. So I got to meet him afterwards, and I went up to his backstage, and I said, "I'm a comic." And he said, "I saw you out there laughing. How did you know when to laugh?" I said, "Well, when the lady next to me laughed, I laughed." He said, "Oh, she's clever." But I just love that because he was so open.
Right. So you are the first open black lesbian comedian.
First out black lesbian comedian in the United States to use lesbian material. Because I think that there was a point at which maybe people knew that Moms Mabley was a lesbian. I don't know that she used lesbian material. So there is that, I want to give my props to that for sure.
Right. Has there ever been a time when you thought you wanted to call it quits?
Oh, yeah. Many times.
What kept you going?
I felt early on when I wasn't really sure, sometimes because dealing in women's community is not quite the kumbaya state of being that many people fantasize about. So there were times when I had to deal with some of these producers and just the whole business of performing, because we are, a slice of show business that I thought, I just really don't want to deal with all this. And what I thought in the quiet of my own mind then was, if I'm not there, who's there? And so that kept me going. For many, many years, that kept me going. because I really did not want lesbian life to just look white. I knew it wasn't white. My life was not just white. And I have so many white friends, and I respect white lesbians, and particularly a lot of the feminists. I consider myself a feminist. But because I have had the experience of coming out after the first National Black Feminist Organization conference that I attended in New York City in 1974, where Barbara Jordan was there, and Sharon Pratt, who later became like a mayor in D.C., and Margaret Sloan Hunter, who co-founded Ms. Magazine with Gloria Steinem, and all these, Alice Walker. And shortly thereafter, I met a phys ed teacher. I always tell the teacher, I met a phys ed teacher who lived in Bridgeport, Connecticut, a few blocks from me, and I moved her in and moved my husband out. So the rest is history. But because I came out that way, I knew that feminism wasn't just for white women, and I refused to allow that notion to stay in place. And the only way that you can combat it in some ways is by being a physical presence until the other women show up. And at the Michigan Women's Music Festival, a lot of other Black lesbians began to show up. And in different places, I began hearing about Black lesbians, and certainly reading Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde helped me to really stay put in the movement, when many times I just felt like I just can't deal with the racism here. You know, yeah, I can be a lesbian, and at the same time, I've got to deal with your race stuff.
Right.
It's daunting. You know, there's really no safe space. And then you have to decide for yourself, am I going to keep on educating white women about racism, or am I just really going to try to be happy? I'm getting older here. I don't really want to keep doing racism workshops 101. That feels like that might be your work to do. How about that?
Yes.
I want to work on prosperity 101. As time was going along, I had to be concerned about my children and their children and my parents. My parents are still alive, and, you know, what kind of older life am I going to have, you know?
What's interesting, because I remember Gloria Naylor, she gave a book reading at Vanderbilt University several years ago. This had to have been like 20 years ago. And I remember her saying, I'm tired of educating people.
Ooh, I remember that as well. I mean, it gets to the point where, you know, I'm not going to let you be rude to me out of your ignorance. However, the idea that I'm now going to conduct a seminar every time you do something that's racist is not going to happen. I just don't want to do that work with you. You know, I have other work. And so I am very happy that the Zami Nobla group is here. I was glad to be in Oakland last week, remembering Ashe. I feel like it's really, before we allow for the disappearance of lesbians, which is really the issue that was starting to upset me a great deal on the Facebook pages, with people being accused of being TERFs and all this other kind of stuff that I don't want to learn about, what it means to segregate again within our own community. I find it intolerable. So I believe that for me it was a blessing, because I was starting to get very upset about divisiveness in the LGBT community and not really knowing how to manage it for myself emotionally. And then I get invited to do Ashe, remembering Ashe, the Black Lesbian Journal. Yay! And then I get invited to Zami Nobla here in Atlanta. Yay! Black lesbians. Yeah, we are strong. We are here. We can now do stuff around aging because we're getting older, and it's real. And no, we're not going to disappear. And no, I'm not a TERF. And I don't want you assigning things to me about whether or not I'm cisgender or any of this stuff. I am an out and proud Black lesbian. I have contributed to the culture of Black lesbians. I have contributed to the culture of radical lesbian feminism, of womanist culture. I'm not going to be erased because you might be a little pissed off right now with you trying to define who I am. The reason I love LGBTQIC communities is because we are standing up and saying we get to define who we are.
Right.
So now within that community, you're going to define who I am? No, that's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. And I'm old enough now that if you come shouting up in my face about it, I'm going to let you know, A, you don't get to do that. And B, I am who I say I am. You know, Cheryl Clark, Black lesbian poet and professor, said, if I say I'm a lesbian, I'm a lesbian. Because why would you say it? Who wants to be part of this hated and maligned group of people, misunderstood, oppressed group of women? And yet, as you're saying, there's a tremendous amount of joy when we're all together. You know, I did Black Women Rise last year, and my beloved friend Jewel Gomez was there, and I made a new friend with the fierce poet Nina J. And I'm telling you, some of these, May Rain did her spoken word. I'm getting chills as I'm telling you about it. I'm sitting there, I'm like in this, Ubaka Hill was there drumming. I mean, I'm there in this glorified place of being with these exquisite women, you know? And how are you going to now erase us? That's not possible.
One of the things that I think is so great about Zami Nobla is a shifting of the paradigm. And this way of saying that there is joy, there is passion, there is grace and gratitude and presence in our lives. And so that's kind of what we put forward. And this podcast really aims to highlight that, because every time I finish a podcast, I'm such an episode, I'm like, gosh, oh, that was great. That was the best one. And I know I'm going to say it after this one. It's because it's more of a collection of stories, and it's more of a saying, bam, this is who we are.
This is who we are. And I don't see how people can make it as though we don't exist.
Right.
You know, things will come out of Detroit, you know, about Ruth Ellis, and she loved me. She loved me. She would just say, I'm so proud of you. And how we get to say that to each other, you know, that as I watch, you know, some of the younger Black lesbians that I get a chance to be around, and you know, there's the two going around now, Nia and Ness. They are a spoken word and dance duo. Oh, MG. I mean, dancing and speaking like the goddesses that they are, you know, and they're doing house concerts because they want to buy their own home. It's just sweet as can be, you know, and so I just feel so excited to be with women. And of course, we have the mainstays in the community, the Melanie DeMoores and Linda Tillery and Mary Watkins. I got to be with them on the 45th anniversary cruise with Olivia Records, and, you know, June Millington as a Filipino woman, and, you know, just the struggles that everyone has had. And we get together. I just had lunch with Deirdre McCall. I mean, she was on that trip. We get to all be together and laugh, and sometimes laugh through our tears. Sometimes they're tears of joy. Sometimes they're the tears of, wow, we've been doing this for so long. And at the same time that we feel that we've made tremendous progress and inroads, there's still so far to go.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And so we're always aware of that. I feel really privileged to come along at a time now when I'm sitting here with you and our legacies will be recorded. No 12-year-old girl, me, will have to look in the Webster Dictionary under lesbian, trying to find out who I am, what I am, where do I go, how does this happen? Is there something wrong with me? Will my family reject me? Will I still be loved? Will I have a lover? And now that we're older, is lovership only defined by the sex we have? You know, or is it defined, as I said last night, by tea and Scrabble? You know? You know, it's like, if we didn't laugh about some of this stuff, how would we manage it all?
It's hard the sexual thing now is hard to figure out, isn't it? It's hard to figure out. You mean to have sex. You do. You say, honey, we're going to have sex after the show tonight. No, you're not. You're laughing. You're exhausted. You're going to go right to sleep as soon as you get there. Because you got to admit today, if you have a choice between sex and a sandwich, the sandwich is going to win. You get energy from the sandwich. You're exhausted after the sex. I remember when I was young, when you wanted to have sex, it just seemed so exciting. Now when you think about it, you think, oh my God, it's a lot of work. A lot of work. And if I'm going to do that much work, I need more people. One person to have sex with and 2 or 3 of my friends to help me move around. Come on. But as a young, radical lesbian feminist, I learned a lot. Like we would take those women's studies courses and they would talk about the power of a woman. Remember that? Yes. Oh, it was just so wonderful to talk about. So one of the things they highlight is that women could make love all night long. Remember that? All night long. Yeah, it's quiet because you don't even really remember. Because when's the last time you made love all night long? And don't feel bad, people. It's never going to happen again. Because the only thing we do all night now is pee. That's it. And the worst part is when you're getting ready to have some sex and you got to pee. Then what do you do?
By the time you get to be an older black lesbian, wow.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's much left for us but to laugh. Mm-hmm. Because we've survived.
Right. Well, one of the things I know we must do is to continue doing our work like you did last night.
Oh,
and
thank you.
You were amazing, absolutely on point. And as I was listening to you and just seeing how you had the ability to respond to the audience and take some improvisation.
Yes.
It goes back to improv.
Yes,
to take something someone says and then do a riff on it.
right.
Oh, that is, it's elegant. I mean, there's something, it's elegant in music, it's elegant in comedy, it's elegant in sermons. I mean, it's just that improvisation.
Yes, it is.
I have a couple of questions for you before we leave. The first is there any subject that is off limits when it comes to comedy for you? Anything you wouldn't touch on stage?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the horror of incest, molestation, things like that. I continue to be horrified by how many women and girls are just disrespected in that way. So that's one of those areas I just cannot find the humor in at all. So yeah, I don't go near that. That's probably, and also, I stopped watching Key and Peele when they did a little sketch and one of them said, well, that sounds rapey. I didn't like that at all either. I don't find rape funny. And so I do notice that people will even say, oh, I felt like I was raped, because you had a bad financial dealing. No. These are words, and unfortunately, words can be consigned to acts that are so vicious that we don't need to use them in any other capacity, If you had a bad financial misdealing, just say, I was ripped off. Okay, all right,
Right.
So things like that, it's the dark. Those are the darker sides of life that trouble me deeply, because in my own life I have the thing I wanted more than money or riches was to be free, is to be free. So when I feel that any kinds of acts are being committed against girls, boys, children, people, that then they will have to fight against most of their lives to feel free, it deeply disturbs me. And there's just far too much of it in our society. Too much dominance and control and misuse of power.
My final question to you is based on the line of thought that there are so many women in their 40s and 50s who have a desire to go back and to do something that they've wanted to do for a long time. And you went back in your 40s to get your bachelor's and your master's. And you did that and you focused on humor, and it propelled your work. If someone is in their 40s and their 50s and they want to do that thing that they've been thinking about, but it seems difficult to muster the courage and the energy to make that happen, based upon your history of going back to school in your 40s, how can someone kind of grab the bull by the horns and do that thing, whatever that thing is?
Well, I believe that, when people ask you what do you want to be as a child, certainly in my lifetime, there were only the three options for a woman: to be a teacher, a nurse, or a secretary. And now you can ask young children, they can say president, or they can say entertainment lawyer. They have a wealth of vocations that they can choose. I just think that if we are able to recapture a dream, and however long lost it may be, then that can propel us forward. I think far too many of us sacrifice our dreams for the good job, the security of the good job. And yes, there's probably is some security in knowing that you're going to have a check every week or every 2 weeks, and we call that security. I just question at what price? At what price to yourself? And so if you can even take the dust off or the crust off of even a little bit of your dream. Like, I always wanted to play music. So then you take piano lessons for a year. Or I bought a recorder. I can now play Three Blind Mice. And I do little shows for my girlfriend. I can do Three Blind Mice and, oh gosh, I can't remember the other one. It's Row, Row, Row Your Boat. And I play it on my recorder and I bow after each selection. And she's an accomplished musician. And she claps like it's a concert. And I'm happy.
Yes.
Because I went to the Bronx High School of Science in New York and I skipped 2 grades and I was on that track to really be scholastically inclined, I held on to the dream of going back to school. So that's why I did it. And I wasn't to help me get a good job. And as far as my work with the Ha Ha Institute, what it did, because as I said, it was a liberal arts degree in humor and healing, and then my master's degree is in adult learning and development with an emphasis on curriculum design and development. And I was already developing courses for the Ha Ha Institute. But what it did is it gave me a framework. So I now understood what parts of my workshops were Jungian and which parts were Freudian and which parts were intuition-based. And I had a framework for the work that I've been doing. I think it made me a better scholar, maybe, in terms of that, because I can navigate my critical thinking better. So I'm grateful for that. And when I'm designing my talks that I give, and now I do diversity and inclusion trainings and things like that, I have that mindset where I can aim towards my learning objectives and things like that. So it did help me that way. What it really did is give me a great sense of personal achievement, that it was something I wanted to do and I did it. And I'm happy that I did.
I feel like there's so much more we could talk about and so much more I want to talk about, but time is limited.
Well, I have sometimes when I do these podcasts, I'm not nearly as chatty. And I think I just get more chatty when I'm talking to a Black lesbian because I just feel that kind of kinship of the need to record our lives.
Right.
And really have something to leave. I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud that we are archiving our lives now.
Yes.
Nobody's going to have to like dig it up and wonder, well, were they? Was she? Oh, I found a double woman sign bracelet in her jewelry she left. You know, no, we can come out and say, hi, I'm Karen Williams. I'm a Black lesbian. Right. Clearly.
So as I say to all of my guests, thank you for being a part of our Black lesbian history.
Thank you so much for asking me.
Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you, Trey. Thank you, Mary Ann. Thank you, all of the Zami Nobla people.
Thank you, Karen, for such a great interview and for shedding light on the healing art of comedy. Please check our show notes for more information as to how you can best contact Karen and learn more about her Ha Ha Institute. As always, we appreciate your listening to the podcast. Please feel free to leave comments wherever you listen. And as always, have a sweet one.